Welcome. Welcome to A Taste of Justice. I am Professor Angela Mae Kupenda, and welcome to this series. It is for all of us. It's for my students who are learning remotely, and it's also for those who are seeking to further justice in our society. Learning is fundamental. Now, if you looked at the last clip, my First Amendment students took an extended take-home examination on the basic principles of First Amendment law. Now they have each written a student position statement, and in that position statement, they are addressing a current First Amendment conflict, discussing the cases that are related. They're arguing the positions opposite their own, and then they're arguing their own position and making a 5-minute presentation in class with questioning that follows. There are so many goals to this exercise. One goal is to educate them more fully about the First Amendment and look at the various ways it applies to many things we are experiencing as a country this year in 2021. Another goal is to work on their writing, another for them to experience making a presentation and addressing those who may or may not disagree with their position. So I'm coming here after every class meeting to tell you about the statements that were presented in that recent class. I am not giving you the names of my students to protect their own privacy and to protect their educational development. And I want to say all summaries here of their work, it is my summaries. These are my summaries based on what I believe I read from them and what I believe I heard from them. All interpretations are my own and are not to be ascribed to my school or even to my students. But for the 7 positions that we heard presented today in class, if you look at the text box at the bottom of the screen, below the screen, you will see the titles of their position statements and the cases that are relevant in their view to their statements, and almost all of the cases relate back to material we have been covering this semester. So let's get started as I tell you about these statements, okay? So the first student, the student statement is, Trump is responsible for the capital city riots, and here's why. So this student took a look at the videos and other information related to the riots at the Capitol on January 6th. Some people say riots, some people say the insurrection, other people say a protest, but the incidents on January 6th at the Capitol. And he also looked at the speech of former President Trump that occurred before, and also looked at what happened after the incident at the Capitol. Now, he argues that President Trump is responsible for what occurred, including the injuries and the loss of lives that happened at the Capitol January 6th and soon thereafter. He argues that the former president's speech was unprotected speech. Now, we've looked at different categories of unprotected speech. This student argues that the speech by former President Trump was speech that advocated illegal action or that it was fighting words, and both categories of that speech fit within the unprotected categories of speech that government can regulate more. Now, his presentation pointed out some things about President Trump's speech, and some classmates questioned him about it. He said, well, that he was examining the speech by looking at the full context of the speech. And his view was that Trump's words incited violence and advocated for illegal action under the modern day test about speech that advocates illegal action from the Brandenburg test. The Brandenburg test says that speech that is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action, that government can regulate it more. So his view is that this speech was unprotected, and so therefore, in his view, President Trump is responsible for the aftermath of the speech, even if he did not have certain specific words that said, go and hurt people. He said, even if he didn't say those words, this student believes that President Trump's words were unprotected speech and speech advocating illegal action. Now, he points out that there are those who would disagree with him. Some say, well, all speech should be a part of this marketplace of ideas concept, going back to Justice Holmes in the Abrams case. He posed a theory that speech should be allowed in the marketplace of ideas, and then if all speech is allowed in the marketplace of ideas, then the truth would win out. And he also said another competing position to his own would be, well, President Trump didn't say certain words. But this student said the full context of the speech, in his view, places President Trump's speech in an unprotected category that government may regulate more. Now, the second student's position statement was somewhat similar. The second student, his statement was, and the title, again, there in the box below the video, was January 6th Capitol Riot, Accountability for All, no matter a person's position. So again, he's looking at what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, and he says that his position is that those who incited this conduct or incited the protest or incited the riot, arrest, insurrection, whatever word you choose to use, he said for those who incited it, they should be held accountable no matter their position. Now, he first considers some of the opposite positions to his own. And just like the previous student, he references the marketplace of ideas theory, that the best test of speech is whether the best test of the truth is its ability to be accepted in the marketplace. The idea that the truth will eventually win out. But even though he says that is a competing position, that is not his position. Now, interestingly, this student says that he does not believe that President Trump intended to incite violence. Nevertheless, he says that under the Brandenburg case and under the Holder versus Humanitarian Law case, he believes that the former president should be held accountable. Now, Holder versus Humanitarian Law was a post 9/11 case that we discussed back toward the beginning of the semester. It dealt with foreign terrorism. And the question was whether or not Holder would apply also to acts of domestic terrorism. Now, the student says that under either theory, he believes that President Trump's speech was unprotected speech. Then he adds an interesting statement in his conclusion. He says, my position is that due to Trump's position as president of the United States, he should have been held accountable for the Capitol riot by impeachment. He says this was not an unknown man. Do you remember we had a case where Justice Holmes said those were silly, unknown people throwing papers, flyers out the window? He said that the president was not an unknown man. The president had certain power because of his position. And that is partly the reason why he believes that the president, that all who created this situation ought to be held accountable, including the former president. Now, our third position statement, also addressing the incidents at the Capitol. This is her position statement. A former president's actions and the subsequent reaction. Why speeches given by political leaders like Donald Trump's speech on January 6, 2021 should not be constitutionally protected under the First Amendment. That is the student's position. Now, in her statement, she addresses many of the same cases that the other two students addressed. She addresses many of the same or similar competing positions that they do, but she made some additional comments that I found quite interesting. Now, one thing she says is that Justice Holmes said to let all of the speech, let the speech out, and the truth will prevail in the marketplace of ideas. That's by Justice Holmes in the Abrams case in his dissent. She said, the student, but we're not in a marketplace of ideas. She says, we're in a mall of insanity. And that is a totally different situation. And that is why she believes that President Trump's speech was not protected by the First Amendment. Now, she made a couple of other points. Now, one thing she argued was that Congress should enact a law, and that law should provide, that law should prohibit presidents and other high-ranking officials from using their position to advocate or incite violence or advocate for overthrowing the government because they disagree with an election. So she believes that there should be a federal law that should prohibit the advocating of violence or an attempt to overthrow the government. And that such a law, she believes, would be constitutional because it would address speech that is unprotected, speech that advocates illegal action. She says that, of course, presidents need some leeway with their speech, but she closes out by saying presidents should not be able to claim protection for advocating insanity. And that was another student's position statement. So right now, I've told you about how many? 3. Do you agree with any of them? Do you disagree with any of them? Take a look at the titles below and see which ones you believe, in your view, got it right. Okay, let's go on to another one. In this statement, here is the student's position title. She argues, banning the President of the United States from social media is not a violation of the First Amendment. That is her position. That removing, and from the fact pattern where President Trump was removed from some of the forms of social media, either temporarily or permanently, he was banned. And she says that it's not violating the First Amendment for social media to ban the president in these circumstances. Now, she says that she knows that not everyone agrees with her. Some people say that social media is a public forum. It's the way people hang out in the public and exchange their ideas. She says some people would disagree with her because they will say you've got to let all the speech into the marketplace, even if speech is hateful, even if speech is inciting violence. They may say, let it all into the marketplace. But this student disagrees with those positions. Here is her position. She says that social media companies are private companies, and private companies also have a right of speech, a right to associate with ideas, a right not to associate with ideas. She points us to a case called Citizens United that we've talked about before and has been greatly critiqued. In Citizens United, the court, fairly many of the conservative justices of the court said that corporations should have a right of political speech just like individuals. So this student's argument is that social media companies are private companies. That how can a private company infringe on the former president's speech rights? You assert your speech rights against the government, not against private companies. So she said that under Citizens United, a private company has a right to have rules for individuals who use or post on their social media accounts. And so therefore, they have a right to speak or to disassociate, and that is what they have done. And therefore, the president's speech rights, the former president, his speech rights were not infringed. She also argues a case called Garcetti. Garcetti, we talked about it. In Garcetti, the court said that a person working for the government has fewer speech rights in matters related to their employment. And so therefore, she argues that President Trump had fewer speech rights under Garcetti because he is a government employee, and government employees have more limitations on their speech. So she said that while she agrees that social media has become a place where people gather to exchange their ideas, while she agrees with that, her position is that a social media company is still a private company and still can decide if it wants to disassociate with certain speech, even the speech of the former president. That is her position. Now we have a position statement that I won't say took an opposite viewpoint, but issued a caution, perhaps based on a different viewpoint. This is the student's position statement. He said, cancel culture is a slippery slope to suppression of First Amendment speech. So he said, after January 6th, then there were individuals being banned from social media. There were individuals who lost book deals. There were individuals who worked for various private companies that had their positions terminated because of the actions they had taken at the Capitol or certain statements they had made on social media. And he says this is a slippery slope. The cancel culture is a slippery slope to suppressing free speech. He said, especially it appears that now the suppression is of certain conservative viewpoints. Now, he says that, of course, there are positions different from his. One position is that, well, people have been canceled before for other viewpoints. And he says that there is a right that individuals have not to associate with certain ideas. However, his position is that we are on a slippery slope. And when views change, then others may slide down this slippery slope. And he believes that ultimately a cancel culture will lead to canceling out of certain views and will be an affront to the First Amendment. And I didn't get to question him on his last part, where he said it can lead to government involvement. I didn't really follow that point, whether he's saying the government will become involved to protect a certain viewpoint. I'm not sure about that, but I found his position also very interesting. Okay, now let's go to, we have two left. In the next position statement, the student argued that protecting private businesses from government regulation, why banning Donald Trump from Twitter does not violate his First Amendment speech rights, and why this provision should be protected. Now you're like, oh, wow, your students are really interested. My students are really interested in the things that are happening now and what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. For their position statements, I will allow the students to select whatever issue related to the First Amendment they wanted to, as long as it was current, as long as they had a strong position about it and were willing to take that position on paper and in the classroom, and as long as they addressed the positions different from their own. And they did all of that. So now we're looking at her statement. Her statement says that banning Donald Trump from Twitter does not violate his First Amendment speech rights, and this provision should be protected. So she again talks about the president's speech and her view that it was speech that incited, that advocated illegal action and that incited violence. When I was listening to her give her presentation, and I questioned her about this later, when I was listening to her give her presentation, I thought of this quote, and I'm not sure who first stated this, but I thought of this quote, that democracy is messy, right? That sometimes we're looking for simple answers. Sometimes we're looking for the marketplace of ideas to be a tidy place, only with our own viewpoints. But democracy perhaps is messy. And I had her to respond to that in the questioning. But back to her statement, her position was that, and I'm going to read what she has here, private social media companies are still private companies and therefore should have the right to ban their members as they see fit. She said, if we allow bakeries, she's doing a take on the Masterpiece Bakery case, I believe. She said, if we allow bakeries, for example, to deny customers based on certain differences without violating any constitutional rights, then surely we can allow social media to have the same rights as they are private companies too. An interesting take here on the Masterpiece Bakery case, where there was a bakery that did not want to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. Now, she also said that even if social media could be construed as government or a public place, even if, an alternative argument, even if, she says that President Trump's speech was still unprotected because it was speech that advocated illegal action, or it was fighting words under the Chaplinsky case. Now, I'm sorry, the paper. I'm reading their statements, looking at my notes as I go along. Our final student position statement for today was this: the First Amendment should not apply to deliberate misinformation. Now, this is a very interesting position statement too. You know, we have talked about during the course of the semester whether the First Amendment protects a lie. Remember that? New York Times versus Sullivan, where there was some misstatements in the ad. We looked at the Alvarez case about misrepresentations about military valor, right? We looked at commercial speech and the requirement that it not be false and misleading. We looked at other cases on defamation where a person's reputation is defamed based on a misrepresentation or a lie. Where public figures are involved and public officials, the court says we want citizens to be engaged in discourse. The court also said that as we engage in robust debate, that almost inevitably someone is going to tell a lie. The court doesn't say it exactly like that, but check it out in New York Times versus Sullivan or Gertz versus Welch. So his position statement is a little different from the statements that the court made in those cases. He argues that the First Amendment should not apply where there is a deliberate lie, deliberate misinformation. And he says that, of course, he understands about the marketplace of ideas and that sometimes misrepresentations do occur. But when he says that when a government official, however, uses deliberate misinformation, he believes that speech should be unprotected. Wow, what a day we had today, right? You know, the goal here is to engage the students in learning, in discussion, to engage them in hearing and responding to viewpoints, some that are in agreement with them and some that are in disagreement with them. Learning is just the key to enlightenment, being enlightened about things, investigating things, learning about things for yourself. Learning is a key to enlightenment. Enlightenment is a key to freedom. And freedom takes us on our way to justice, or at least to a taste of justice. Look, I want you to subscribe and sign up for notifications. I will be back again on Wednesday or after to tell you about more position statements. The ones for the next clip also deal with the Capitol on January 6th, what happened before, and also what happened after. So subscribe and sign up for notifications. You don't want to miss a thing. Thank you. Bye-bye.